Hello and welcome to a video that I realised would be something that's fun to do. I watch a lot of BookTube, and something BookTubers like to do at the start of each year is kind of like talk about their top 10 favourite book series of all time, and then kind of like redo that every year to see how that changes over time, because it's the kind of thing where you could ask someone, you know, on the 1st of January and the 2nd of January and their responses would be different, just because when you're trying to pick from such a large pool of such high quality games, it can be or books in their case, it can be really difficult to settle. And I thought, you know, it's February, we're halfway through February, this isn't exactly a start of a year idea, but why not give it a try with video games? What are my top 10 video games of all time as of the time of recording? I think the last time I did this was as a blog post over a decade ago, so we're definitely due for an update. I will say I am trying to be as honest about my top 10 as possible, which means no kind of going, oh, but I'm neglecting this genre. Like, for instance, I've spent hundreds of hours in racing games, probably thousands of hours in racing games, but there's not a single racing game in my top 10. My top 20, probably, but I'm trying to resist the urge to find somewhere to put a Forza game in there, because I'm trying to make this as honest as possible. So just to say, there are going to be some genres which are missed out entirely here. That doesn't mean I don't like them. That doesn't even mean I don't love them. It just means that you know, even if it is a cluster of very similar games near the top, it is an accurate reflection of my raw top 10, I guess we'll call it. This isn't 10 games to get to know me, it's my top 10 games. If people enjoy this video, I might do another one in the future, which is like my top 10 racing games, my top 10 single player RPGs, that kind of thing. I do like the idea of doing that, but for now I am just going to purely stick to the very top 10. I just went back and looked at that old blog post, by the way, and my selection now is very different. And final thing before we get started, these are just my takes. I'm not even saying that these are the objectively best games. Everyone has different tastes, things land differently with everyone. There are a few entries in here which I think might even prove to be controversial depending on how much you care. This is just me, this is where my head's at right now. So without further ado, number 10 on my top 10 games of all time is Minecraft. And that might feel a little weird because Minecraft definitely feels more like a platform these days than a game in itself. It certainly doesn't get many updates to the video game side of it, but I think it's one of those games that is so successful and so good that it gets taken for granted. It's a bit like a Mario platformer, right? You really enjoy playing it, but when you go to think about your favorite games, it's like, well, obviously there's Mario. Heads up, Mario's not actually on this list, sorry. But no, I was there in 2009. I think Minecraft was in its inf dev phase, so it hadn't even reached the, you know, base version of the game in alpha that it is known for today. And a friend showed me a YouTube video of a house being built in the classic version of Minecraft at the time, and I went, oh, like a light lit up in my brain. I was like, I need this. That's right, I'm saying I knew Minecraft before it was cool. I don't think that makes me a hipster these days, I think it just makes me old. But yeah, due to personal circumstances, I wasn't able to actually play Minecraft for the longest time, and so I survived on YouTube Let's Plays of it. Although back then, I literally remember searching for Minecraft in the YouTube search bar and finding nothing. That's almost inconceivable today, I know. But while in 2025 Minecraft has definitely slid out of a common consciousness and into the realms of kind of just like, you know, it's one of those video games that's always available if you just happen to fancy playing it. It is something that I still enjoy playing greatly, and I still suggest it when we're trying to figure out what game we want to play as a group of friends. And I think my friends are still like, come on dude, Minecraft has been done to death. I'm like, yeah, but it's Minecraft, it's cool, it's fun. Most recently I discovered Minecraft's ability to be an audiobook game, by which I mean a game which doesn't require enough brain resources to distract from listening to an audiobook, so it's good for multitasking in that way. I've currently built, or I've just started a new survival save called Storyland, and when big things happen in books I'm reading, I'm just going to plop down a sign wherever I am and be like, you know, this is where this happened. so that, because there's a funny thing that happens with books, I think, on audiobooks, where you kind of associate the memory of where you were or what you were doing at the time with something that happens in a book, and it's fun to kind of like stumble across that sometimes. But yeah, Minecraft, it feels almost too foundational to be a pick in its own right, but I still love playing it. It's a game I'm always going to love playing in all its forms, and it just didn't feel right not including it on that list for that reason. At number 9, we have a Pokemon game, and while this isn't how I've chosen my selections for the other games on this list, for this one I did have to sit back and go, Pokemon, but which game? I had to choose which single game to include from the series on this list. Because, if I'm being honest, I think I love Pokemon as a series more than I love any individual game. There are definitely standout bangers for sure, and I've picked one of them, and I'll have to do some justifying when I reveal which one it is. But my love for Pokemon kind of extends beyond any individual game. And once again, it kind of felt like it had to be included on this list. So which game did I choose? For me, it was between a few. It was between Diamond, Soul Silver, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon X, because I did enjoy X, and Pokemon Sword, which is what I've chosen. Please let me explain. I know people didn't love Gen 9. Wait, no, that's Gen 8. I know people didn't love Gen 8. I know people might throw sticks and rocks at me for this, but I love Pokemon Sword. It's one of my favorite Pokemon games, and I did end up just looking for the one that I've got the most playtime in. I think objectively, Pokemon Legends Arceus is the better Pokemon game, don't get me wrong, but as far as like games I've spent the most hours in and enjoyed the most, I think it's gotta be Pokemon Sword. Obviously the wild area felt kind of half-baked, and the wild area in itself I don't think is that great, but what this Pokemon game did for me, which no other Pokemon game has done, is it gave me an endgame that I gave a shit about. Most Pokemon endgames are just like, okay, go complete the Pokedex, which can be meticulous and annoying. I know, fake fan, am I right? And then you can go to some sort of battle league and just battle endless waves of trainers and stuff, and I'm not about that. But Pokemon Sword introduced these max raids, and what it did is it let you choose one Pokemon from your boxes and pit it against a max raid Pokemon with other players as this kind of like PvE style raid encounter, and yeah, you could try and find, like, I really liked the way they handled IVs and EVs and showing you those values and stuff in game as well. I thought it was the most transparent and easy to understand version of that, so it was really fun to just do these raids and hunt like these excellent stat Pokemon and stuff. And then of course the DLC improved upon that with Dynamax adventures, which I know are quite universally beloved. But I was just there from the max raids themselves, you know, kind of like cycling around the wild areas, finding these various dens, grouping up and doing these raids. I was actually playing Pokemon after the end of a story for a significant period of time, which isn't something I've ever done before, and I think that earns Pokemon Sword a place on this list. You might be wondering about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which kind of builds upon that. I haven't finished that game yet because I was so put off by how it performed, but I have been giving it a second chance, and I have been streaming through those games, or I guess that game. I've been streaming through Pokemon Violet recently, so who knows, maybe Pokemon Violet will end up taking Sword's place, because it is apparently, according to the wisdom of crowds, the better game in terms of gameplay out of the two. And I can see where they're coming from, but for now Pokemon Sword is gonna do it. Now that I've justified the hell out of that, let's move on. At number 8, we've got Skyrim, which might also just be a bit of an eye roll for people who are like, yeah, well duh, of course it's Skyrim. Of course it's Skyrim. In the intervening years... Oh, that was weird. Did you hear that? What happened to my voice? In the intervening years, we've had open world RPGs which have also met critical acclaim and have brought the genre forward, like The Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild and Tears of a Kingdom, if you want to count that. And with games like Fallout 76 and Starfield, sentiment towards Bethesda has actually dipped quite a bit. But that doesn't change the fact for me that Skyrim is my favourite open world RPG of all time, and I could just happily drop everything and go play it for endless hours, and that's after having spent hundreds of hours in it already. And that's without me being interested in modding. This might sound like sacrilege, I'm not that interested in modding when it comes to games in general. Especially when it comes to Skyrim, one of the things I love about it is it was my first real introduction into the world of the Elder Scrolls, and I have since gone back and played some Oblivion and Morrowind, and also a whole bunch of ESO. But what I love about Skyrim is the Elder Scrolls universe, and I feel like mods kind of like, you know, I get hung up on the non-canon nature of mods sometimes. But yeah, to get back into Skyrim itself, you know, what can really be said about it that hasn't been said already? It just is a fantastically crafted experience of this world. Get a load of me, I should work for IGN. Now, you know, it's got the wallpaper syndrome of I've played the game so long it's hard to see it for a game instead of just a thing that I go experience every now and again. And I've had plenty of years to see the cracks like the combat, the fact that nobody references events that happen in factional quest lines, and a bunch of the innovations that Skyrim made have now fallen by the wayside over the years and aren't that impressive anymore, such as the Radiant AI and all of that stuff. But what I love Skyrim for is it really is just this vast open space where you can go and find a cave that after 500 hours you've never seen before, and it's got this side quest that you've never heard of before with these characters talking about these things that you've never noticed before, and you can go and have a new adventure despite knowing the game front to back, because you don't actually know the game front to back, because Skyrim always has new secrets to uncover and explore. That being said, I don't think we need to linger too much longer on Skyrim. At number 7, we have Ratchet & Clank 2. It's called Locked and Loaded here in the UK because we're cowards, but it's called Going Commando in its country of origin. That's right, after all these years, I still count Ratchet & Clank among some of my favourite games ever made. Ratchet & Clank 2 is objectively not as good of a game as Ratchet & Clank 3, I get it. It's kind of a hybrid of the philosophies of the first game and the third game, because whereas the first game was a little bit more platformer focused, where you could also just run around and shoot enemies, 3 was definitely more of a third-person shooter with cover systems and stuff. There are a few levels in 2 which have cover systems and most levels which don't. I actually watched a developer playthrough of 2, which is kind of like why I know it so inside and out in terms of design philosophy too. But Ratchet & Clank just has my favourite planet. It has my favourite memories, if I'm being honest. It has some really sentimental memories that I hold dearly. But also I just love, it's the first game that introduced the weapon evolution system, where you gain XP for your weapons and they level up and they transform into these different weapons. And this would become a staple of the series, but it would become a lot more incremental from 3 onwards, where you would have V1, V2, V3, V4, and then V5 would be the big upgrade, which would transform how the gun worked. I think part of me still prefers just the Ratchet & Clank 2 system of doing things, where it's just a gun and then it's a different gun. I think the pacing of the acquisition and upgrading of weapons throughout doesn't leave much to be desired. It's not like you upgrade all your weapons long before the game ends and you feel bored with the, you know, wishing you had like a third version of them or anything. And if you've never played a Ratchet & Clank game, I'm talking about guns. It's not like an AK-47 and stuff like that. It's like these goofy cartoony guns, like for instance the bouncer, which allows you to shoot these kind of mines which bounce around and explode, and when you upgrade it, it's like more of a cluster bomb where they explode into a bunch of mini bouncer bombs and stuff. It's stuff like that. The 2016 remake had a kind of shotgun which turned enemies into pixels as they died. The new game Rift Apart has something called the Topiary Sprinkler, which is a sort of grenade which turns everything into topiary. I don't know how else to say it. Turns enemies into plants and stuff. It's such a good action platformer series, and while later games definitely refine the format and are arguably objectively better games, Ratchet & Clank 2 just has too much of a place in my heart to overlook. At number 6 is Diablo 3. Took me a while, but I've finally come to terms with the fact that I prefer Diablo 3 to Diablo 4. If you started the franchise with Diablo 1 or 2, you might be scratching your head right about now, wondering what makes 3 so special. It was a controversial release at the time. I first played Diablo 3 around the time of the Reaper of Souls expansion coming out, so I definitely played it after they fixed a lot of the problems people had with it, and it was my first time playing any game like it. I've put hundreds of hours into Diablo 3 across many different characters, across many different platforms, and to be honest, I still think it's unmatched in terms of isometric action RPGs. I've still yet to have such a sense of progression and fun and immersion as I have with Diablo 3. I'm also unapologetically a fan of its story. I know it's a lot less grimdark and a lot more kind of comic book than people would have liked in comparison to Diablo 2 and Diablo 4 afterwards. But I kind of vibe with the whole heaven versus hell with humans caught in the middle, and just, you know, there are definitely problems with Diablo 3's story, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of what introduced me to the lore of Diablo, and through that lens is what I enjoyed seeing it as. Like, you can show people the cinematic at the start of Act 4, you know, which is Imperius versus Diablo, and they will tell you that it's everything that's wrong with Diablo 3 because it's a lot more MCU than it is Diablo 2, for instance. It's not gothic, it's you know, it's fantasy. But I love that cinematic so much. It's so cool, and I think that is the very essence of me enjoying Diablo 3 over its predecessors. I have gone back and played a little bit of Diablo 2 Resurrected, and I did enjoy what I played of it, but the gameplay did ultimately end up feeling a little bit too archaic for me to truly get my teeth stuck into. It's the Morrowind problem for me, where I can appreciate that it is, you know, at its time, an incredible game, and I wish I had played it back during its time so that I could have appreciated it fully, but having played its sequels and the innovations those sequels bring, I find it legitimately hard to go back and enjoy them in the manner that people enjoyed them at the time and still continue to, having played them first. Bloody hell, that was a mouthful. But yeah, Diablo 3 spawned a hunger in me where now I still get the itch to play a game like Diablo 3, but I've played every class. I've played Diablo 3 to death, and while it is still one of my favourite games, when I want to play Diablo 3, I now want to play a new experience that's like Diablo 3, and so far the closest I've come to that is Grim Dawn. I've tried Path of Exile many times, and I never get more than half an hour into it. There is something about that game that I fundamentally do not click with. But yeah, Diablo 3, still solid game, and I think it's tragic that the game didn't get the amount of content updates that it deserved, because as much as I like Diablo 4, it's just not the sequel to Diablo 3 that I wanted. At number 5, we have a game that insists on climbing through the ranks every year. It's No Man's Sky. And let me tell you, previously on my 2014 list, I think it was, of my top 10 games ever, Spore was up there for the space stage, and No Man's Sky ate Spore's lunch on that regard. I played No Man's Sky in 2017 when it had received very few updates, so I didn't play the base version where, you know, people hated it. But I did play it after a few significant updates where people went, oh, they're actually working on this thing. Of course, now the redemption arc story of No Man's Sky has been repeated ad infinitum, and, you know, I don't need to repeat it here, you've heard it enough. But somewhere around the time of a World's Part 1 update last year, I realised that this game had just become one of my favourite games of all time, full stop. I remember being in secondary school in ICT, and talking to my friends about the ideal video game that we would like to play, and we pretty much pitched No Man's Sky. We wanted to explore an infinite universe where you could explore the planets at scale with interesting things to explore and do and make bases and stuff like that, and we wanted to get in a spaceship and fly to the solar system and fly around the solar system and see the moons and see the different planets and then fly between systems and explore entire galaxies, and that is No Man's Sky. Even down to the way we visualized the game, although I can't speak for my friends, but the way I visualized the game in my head, pretty much No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky is actually more colourful than I think what I was envisioning. And I just want to go back in time and grab my teenage self by the shoulders and go, we did it. We got the game we wanted. Just, there's going to be a misfire at the start, but just be patient because you are going to get the game of your dreams. Also, it's okay to fancy guys. Anyway, one of the things I love about No Man's Sky is that while a game like Minecraft, which I think it's fair to compare it to, has this, you know, fully charted quality to it where, you know, you load up a Minecraft save, you know what you're going to see, you know what you're going to do. After hundreds of hours of gameplay, No Man's Sky does not have that. There are still entire aspects of this game I haven't touched because it is constantly receiving these giant content updates for free. I just heard about the autophage for the first time. I didn't know they existed, and they've been in the game for years. One of my favourite recent changes to No Man's Sky has been the sheer customizability of the difficulty, and on my main save I've toned down the survival gameplay stuff in terms of I just get more resources from stuff, so I don't have to go out, stop what I'm doing, and go harvest some ferrite every 5 minutes. It's the perfect balance of gameplay for me personally, but I also love the expeditions where you go on these curated experiences and you get really rewarding rewards, I guess, and you get to keep those saves later on and stuff. Oh my god, No Man's Sky is just a masterpiece at this point. I think it's inarguably a masterpiece of a game. This game felt like it was truly complete years ago, and they just keep dropping more content, and I keep going, yeah, sure, Gas Giants, it has been missing those, I'll take that. I know people like to call games slick nowadays, like it's slick how they do these things. No Man's Sky is pretty dang slick in how, you know, just like going from you know, planets to space and docking with like space stations and stuff like that. It's just slick. It has not grown old so far. Now, a word of warning, to quote Claudia Winkleman, we are now approaching the MMO. Did I dream about Claudia Winkleman last night? Sorry, I dreamed I was on a Traitors last night. That is so random. Anyway, I'm leaving that in. As I was saying, we are now approaching the MMO line. Anyone who knows me might have been wondering where the MMOs are going to end up on this list, because I am an MMO gamer. I am a multiple MMO gamer. I rotate through the following games fairly often, and putting them in any kind of order has been very difficult, so please praise me. At number 4, my fourth favourite game of all time is The Elder Scrolls Online. I mentioned Skyrim earlier, so we do have 2 entries from the same series, although technically ESO is a spin-off, which is hilarious considering how gigantic that game is. The Elder Scrolls Online is a fairly unique beast and quite difficult to describe. It's probably the most RPG-heavy MMO on this list, as it certainly tries to emulate a lot of things from the mainline Elder Scrolls series, and it does so successfully in my opinion. But it is also important to note, if you've never played this, it is an MMO, and going into it expecting it to be co-op Skyrim, you're gonna have a bad time. But as a game in its own right, as its own beast, The Elder Scrolls Online is phenomenal. I would say the weakest thing about it is the combat, which is kind of described sometimes, I've heard, as faux action, where you're swinging your sword at enemies and hits are connecting, but something just doesn't feel solid. Not to worry, because you will be mostly doing your abilities and stuff, but you do those sword swings, that's hard to say, or bow shots or staff shots and stuff like that to regain your stamina or magicka as necessary. But combat aside, The Elder Scrolls Online is an attempt at creating the entire world of Tamriel. So if you don't know, for instance, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim takes place in the province of Skyrim. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion takes place in the province of Cyrodiil. The Elder Scrolls III takes place in the province of Morrowind. They are all part of this continent called Tamriel, which is gigantic and has, at this point, reams of lore and history to sift through, and the various expansions. I mean, the Elder Scrolls Online base game takes up a sizable portion of Tamriel by itself, with its 3 major factions, including areas like Morrowind and Skyrim and Daggerfall, areas of Black Marsh, areas of Somerset, Valenwood. The appeal of ESO to the Elder Scrolls main series enjoyer is that a lot of these areas you've only heard of, like Elsewhere as well, you've only heard of in the lore, you actually get to go and visit and have involved storylines take place in. And those storylines are usually pretty good, and it does... My favourite thing I think about ESO that it does is the idea of map completion. Each map, whether it's a DLC map or a part of the base game, it'll have like a main quest line, and it'll have a bunch of side quests to go and do, as well as some more MMO-y things like delves, which are like mini solo dungeons and stuff like that. Basically, The Elder Scrolls Online was tailor-made for someone like me who loves Skyrim, loves Elder Scrolls lore, and also happens to love MMOs as video games. I've sunk almost 900 hours into this game across Xbox and PC so far, and I still have plenty of stories I can go and check out if I want to. I play on Xbox EU these days, and the community tends to be pretty nice. The game does seem to be focusing more on its live service elements these days, which I'm a little bit wary about, but if you are a newcomer to The Elder Scrolls Online and it does happen to be a game that you will enjoy, you have so much story content to go and see, fully voiced, and of course, while it is undoubtedly going to be gameplay wise at least a little bit formulaic because it is an MMO and it does span such a wide range of places and just content, I'm willing to bet you're still going to have a great time for a long time. I recommend starting with the Morrowind expansion, which takes place on Vardenfell, which is where Morrowind in the Elder Scrolls 3 takes place. Are you still with me? At number 3, we have RuneScape. This is cheating a little bit because it is both RuneScape 3 and old school RuneScape, but if you're going to make me pick one, I'm going to go for the controversial pick again and go for RuneScape 3, even though it is a microtransaction hellscape these days. I play as an Iron Man in RuneScape 3, which means I have no access to the pay-to-win elements of the game and no access to trading, which, you know, you'd have to not have access to trading to be able to avoid that. And therefore, all of my accomplishments are my own. So RuneScape. How would I describe RuneScape to someone who has never seen or heard of it before? Oh god. Okay, so you know how the Elder Scrolls Online is like if you took an action RPG like Skyrim and ballooned it into MMO format. RuneScape is like if you took a point-and-click adventure and ballooned that into an MMO format. RuneScape's main selling point, I think, is that it has, I want to say 28 skills, it's probably more than that nowadays. Instead of choosing a class, you have these different skills to go and level up individually. Some of them will be combat skills, like magic or ranged, and some of them will be, or most of them I suppose, are other skills like woodcutting or cooking or alchemy. It's not alchemy, it's herb lore, and each of these skills has, well, they used to all have a cap of 99, now some of them have a cap of 110 or 120. But the game is just huge in terms of like the different things you can do, the different avenues of content you can go down. It is a museum of over 20 years of gameplay development. And if you're someone whose brain gets tingled by number go up, you're gonna have a great time. RuneScape is a fantastic second screen game, and if you don't know what that means you don't have to give it your primary attention, because if you're doing something like, for instance, woodcutting, usually it'll be like you click a tree, your character chops the tree, and it'll be like a minute or two before the tree gets chopped down and you have to click a different tree. RuneScape is a game that sounds very boring when you explain it out loud, but I promise it is fulfilling. It is a long-term investment. If you want something more immediate as well, there is its famous quest system, which unlike most MMOs is, you know, each quest is like a point-and-click adventure, fully uniquely written, with puzzles and all this stuff. It's not just go out and grind quests to get XP. Usually you're actually grinding XP to unlock the quests, although the quests do come with their own rewards, which are well worth seeking out. RuneScape has a fairly comedic tone, but it does also have its own sprawling and expansive lore these days, which I've still yet to really delve into because I'm very stubborn about seeing it for myself and very bad about actually doing the questing. Again, if a RuneScape 3 issues give you too much ick, I also do highly recommend old school RuneScape, which for the most part has avoided those so far and has its own development team. If you don't know what it is, it's basically they took the 2007 version of the game, which was very different to the 2013 version of the game that existed when they did this, and they just decided to continue development on from there and made it very player driven in terms of like suggesting updates before developing them and having the player base vote yes or no on them, and the player base are more than happy to vote no on things. There have been entire skills that just weren't added to the game because they weren't passing polls. Like warding. Anyone remember warding? I think that's what it was called. Anyway, you have two flavors to pick from, and I recommend you go and have a look, so long as you keep an eye on controversies surrounding Jagex's business strategies, because they did put out some weird shit this year about their plans for segmenting membership and stuff, but I think they nipped that in the bud. They didn't nip it in the bud. If they did that, there wouldn't be any controversy, but I think the player base basically eventually shouted it down. So yeah. Also, if you're looking for an MMO out of all of these ones that I'm about to share with you that you might want to check out first because it might not exist in 5 years, Jagex ain't looking too solid right now, so maybe check it out while you can. I don't know, I might just be doomsaying. Now, these next two games have swapped places several times throughout the making of this video, but I think I've reached my honest conclusion, and it's also two games which you will have heard me talk about in similar ways in previous videos, I'm afraid, but this is the raw and honest truth of my top 10 favourite video games of all time as of a time of recording, so without further ado, at number 2 is a game which was at number 1 for a very long time, World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is the MMO, or at least it was, and it's probably my most played game of all time, at least right now, and despite its dips in quality over the various expansions, if we're looking at my life as a macro, my favourite games right now and my favourite games in terms of over the course of my entire life, World of Warcraft has got to occupy a top spot on this list. I love the world, I love the lore, I love the different classes, I've played every single one, I love how they play, I love how the game just feels to play, I love the leveling experience most of all. I think I think I have like 50 alts at this point. I was gonna say I can go check, but the exact number isn't very important. I love all the different flavors. I play some classic, I play some Cataclysm classic, I play some hardcore vanilla classic, although I won't lie, retail is where I spend most of my time. I started the game during the Mists of Pandaria era, and I've played every expansion as it's come out since. And it's a little hard to talk about right now because it's not currently on my list of games that I am playing or have played recently or feel like playing again soon. But during any given year, I will undoubtedly spend a few months playing this game, coming up with new characters, writing little lore backstory tidbits for them. I feel like I know the lore of the world well enough to be able to kind of like write within it. The latest expansion is The War Within, and I did really enjoy the main story for that. I still don't think it was quite as good as they were hoping to accomplish, but it was definitely one of the better ones. Personally, I have no interest in this upcoming patch to do with goblins and stuff, so I am just gonna skip that and play through the story at some point later. But some of the innovations they've been making, I guess I can't call them innovations when they stole them from Guild Wars 2, can I? But the dynamic flight, or whatever the hell they're calling it these days, was a very important and very well-regarded change to the game. They're adding player housing soon, which has been a requested feature for decades, and from the blog posts I've read, it kind of sounds like they're approaching that well. I just love the visual aesthetic of the World of Warcraft franchise and the game itself, and I think, if I'm being honest, probably my least favourite thing about this game is its ongoing story, because I'm just so cynical about it, even now when it's better than it was in Shadowlands. I still don't really trust Blizzard to deliver a compelling story after what I've experienced from the number 1 game. It's inevitable, isn't it? Shall we, there's not really that much to say about WoW that hasn't been said already. Apart from the fact that it thoroughly does deserve to be in my number 2 spot. But number 1, my favourite game of all time as of the time of recording, is obviously Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV uses World of Warcraft as a kind of a baseline and then puts a Final Fantasy game on top of it. And 14 was also my first Final Fantasy game, I should add. I'm still in the middle of exploring the series, but I have now tinkered at least with many games in the series. But to talk about 14, because that's what we're here to do, to talk about my favourite game ever made, it reaches top marks in so many different categories. Firstly, the main thing you hear about this game, the story. After 40 hours it gets good, we promise. I'm one of those promises, it really does. A Realm Reborn isn't as bad as many people make it out to be, but in comparison to what comes later, it is very slow, of course. But the story of Final Fantasy XIV is incredible. It is heartfelt, it is revelatory, it is just, it's character driven in a way that MMO stories usually aren't. It accomplishes a lot that most MMO stories don't manage to accomplish. I won't give any spoilers, but one of my favourite examples is in the Endwalker main story, where the story signals that it's about to do something, and I go, but you can't do that, that doesn't make sense for an MMO game to do, and then the story did that, and I went, oh fuck. That was during the 3rd zone, for anyone wondering, and I'm sure people can figure out what I'm talking about there. So yeah, Final Fantasy XIV, up to Endwalker at least, has one of my favourite stories I've ever experienced, period. I found it deeply emotionally moving, as I've said before. It also has various side stories in the raid questlines and stuff, which can also be extremely good and emotionally moving in their own right. But yeah, to speak a bit about gameplay, It is also a 10 out of 10 in terms of combat. The bosses in this game are unlike any other in MMOs that I've seen. As you level up, you just gain continued complexity to your character's rotation, to the point where at level 100, just doing your rotation, it's not like extremely difficult, but when you're trying to keep on top of all the things the boss is doing as well, it's legitimately engaging in a way that MMO combat usually is not. And then like figuring out boss tells, and there are so many bosses in this game that I'm floored that they're still coming up with crazy and innovative new ideas for bosses to face off against you. People spend so much time talking about the story of this game. I'm one of them. Hi, it's me. Did you listen to the last 5 minutes of this video? But sometimes they skip over the fact that the raiding content in this game is incredible. Not just the boss fights themselves, but also the way that the content is structured. Like, there's barely any trash. They do these things called alliance raids where there's sometimes a little bit of trash to do, but those are more the type of raids that you'd expect from World of Warcraft. But they also do these normal raid series where it's literally you just load into the boss fight, and the way they hand out gear is really good as well. The community aspect of Final Fantasy XIV is also incredible. People love this game. They love to interact with people who also were super touched by the story and stuff like that. If you find yourself a good FC, this game can feel like home, especially with like the FC housing and like neighborhood systems and stuff like that. And then also, sorry, I should have touched on this in the gameplay section, but the job system in this game, where you can play any job or any class all on one character, is exceptional. Not just that, but every job or class or whatever, they also have their own associated storylines with them. That's also phenomenal. It really tickles the completionist aspect of my brain, where currently I'm running around on Tomeris, my Warrior of Light, trying to get them all leveled up. It's almost like a combination of World of Warcraft's different classes with the whole RuneScape skilling system of just being able to do everything on one character. And just like some of the other games I mentioned here, this game is really deep in terms of like, there's also all of these systems you can go and check out that I still haven't gone and seen them all. There's the Allied Society reputations, there's these various different exploratory zones through which you can help level up your character like Bodja. Like I said, there's the optional raid systems. Oh my god, I didn't even talk about how the game keeps everything current. So whereas something like World of Warcraft introduces a new expansion and suddenly all of the previous content becomes pointless apart from just to level swiftly through and you won't see the entire story and stuff like that, Final Fantasy XIV does such a good job of level scaling you to the content so it can still be relevant. And because you're trying to level multiple classes on one character as well, there are different aspects of the game which might remain relevant from times when they might not have been beforehand. The story interweaves through dungeons and trials, which are like raid boss fights but not quite as involved, I guess. And at no point does it truncate any single expansion story experience to try and get you to its most recent stuff more quickly. And so the expansions to the game truly feel like expansions to the game instead of just like, this is what the game is now. But yeah, I'm gonna stop waffling on about Final Fantasy XIV because I think I've proved my point of how it's my favorite game of all time and all that. It still does pain me to think that this video isn't truly a representation of all of the different types of games I like to play. Like, I didn't mention Dragon Quest at all, I didn't mention Halo in here anywhere. Well, I guess now I did. I didn't mention Animal Crossing. I realized halfway through this video Animal Crossing wasn't in my top 10. Should it be? I decided no, it's probably number 11. All the same, that's going to do it for me. Those are my top 10 games as of the time of talking right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. I considered doing this as more of a scripted video where I wrote it up in blog post style and then published it there and also recorded my thoughts, but I wanted to make it more freeform than that. What did you think of my top 10 games of all time? What are your top 10 games of all time? Let me know in the comments below and I will catch you in the next video.